Hey all, welcome to Circle of Tone. And before we get started, I'd like to thank my patrons of Tone. So these are the guys that donate if you like what I'm doing. You know, my videos often get demonetized. Today, I've landed my white whale. This is a picture of me when I was a kid, Adam and the Ants, and more specifically, Marco Pirroni, who I was obsessed with when I was a kid, because it was the first time that I'd heard a guitar sound and went, whoa, what's that? It was my first ever experience of fanboying. So let's get on to the track. That was Kings of the Wild Frontier. Technically, I think it was the second album, but it was the first big hit album. And I got this from Marco himself. So he was good enough. I contacted him, and usually they don't get back to me. In this case, he did, and he was great. He was so forthcoming with all the information. It was a huge deal for me, and this is awesome. Sometimes I'm glad I started this channel just for little interactions like that. So let's get down to the bones of his gear. It was the old Gibson Junior. Now, when he first got the Junior, it had like uncontrollable feedback, and I'm not surprised with what he was using, because he was using a Marshall, a JMP Mark II, with I think a mid-late 70s cab, so probably with creambacks or blackbacks in it. So I used blackbacks, Celestion blackback 12-inch speakers on this to try and match the tone as best as I could. But he took that guitar, because it was feeding back so much, because he was using an MXR Dynacomp as well. So I actually have the one from that era as well on this. He would always have that on full, 10, 10. There's two knobs on there, and the compression and the volume, and they were all on 10. So that, with the tone off, that's where you get a lot of that sustain from. And because his tone is often a contradiction. It's often twangy and thick at the same time. I call it the push-pull, where you push the mids, you push the treble, and then you pull away with the tone, where you take the tone completely off on the bridge. You know, it only had one pickup at the time. He picked it up for £325 in Birmingham back in the day, and his friend Stephen Deft, actually, he liked this pickup called the Velvet Hammer, and that thing is a flamethrower. Now, I am kind of gutted that I got rid of my Gibson Dirty Fingers, which is I think it's about 16K, 15K. But this thing is almost 20K output. So this thing is, from going from a P90, which is around the 7, 8K range, to something that is almost 3 times stronger, give him the oomph. But it doesn't end there. Oh, by the way, the Velvet Hammer is the old Joan Jett, that classic sound. So, but it didn't end there. He also, a lot of the time on those early albums, he'd have his tone rolled completely off. Now, that isn't that surprising, because those old blackbacks were pretty sharp. And also the Marshalls are nothing but mids and presence and teeth. And I also got his settings as well, which is great. So I've tried to recreate as much as I can. I got an old JMP, it's similar to the JCM 800. And I got the old Dynacomp. But unfortunately, because most of my guitars don't have a tone knob on them, I couldn't match the pickup. So my tone is going to be slightly off, but I think I got pretty close. I got pretty close when you consider the other stuff that they were doing with the guitars. Now, I thought that there was, especially on Kings of the Wild Frontier, I thought there was a Bigsby, like dive bombs, things like that. I thought there was all sorts of weird chorus pedals, but they actually used, for a lot of the chorus type of effects back then, it was kind of a warbly effect. So it was literally a warble. They used to manipulate the tape. So Chris, who was the drummer, vari-speed the tape while he was playing, so that you couldn't really recreate it with a pedal, because it would be a manual thing. And also then you put on somebody's technique, because he didn't always dive. There was a fixed bridge on the Les Paul Junior, so he couldn't do dive bombs. So he would manipulate chords, and he would also bend the neck, and he would also get somebody manually messing around on the tape. The main crux, manual manipulation of the guitar and the actual tape. So that is a huge aspect of that old warbly, chorusy, moving 3D effect that you had from Marco's guitars, which I think was absolutely groundbreaking. Today, it sounds amazing. Imagine back then, when you're a little kid out of nowhere, Adam and the Ants like explodes from your TV. It's awesome. For the obvious effects, when it was a tremolo effect, it was usually a Fender Twin, or it was, if it was really clean, he'd use the old Gothic staple. I've got this video series called Goth Broth, where I do things like, The Cure and Killing Joke and Susie and the Banshees. Marco actually started in Susie and the Banshees. So yeah, they would use the jazz chorus, the Roland jazz chorus, which is, the Gothic staple. He also, say on Ant Music, there's that awesome guitar solo. That was direct with a cranked preamp. It's awesome. And then he'd have the Marshall then on the, and unplug the jukebox. So there was lots of tricks. There was lots of tricks to the album, the Ant sound, which is why it's so hard to recreate, because they'd often use open tunings as well, where you do as many open plucked strings as you possibly can, because it just rings out so nicely. And also they would do some guitar solos, which I thought were guitar solos, were actually done on the Gibson grabber bass, up on the higher strings. So it's pretty cool stuff. So I mentioned Chris Hughes earlier. He actually went on to be a little bit of a producer. He worked on Tears for Fears. I'm not saying he remixed the Christmas album. He actually worked and co-wrote Everybody Wants to Rule the World. He is in that level. We're talking Bon Jovi. So yeah, Chris Hughes, I knew him as Merrick in the band. He was the drummer. I think he played keys as well. But what a career he went on to have, man. And that's what I like. I actually respect Marco, because he's never gone out of his way to blow his own trumpet. The old punk ethos. He plays with swagger. And I loved it. I always remember how confident he looked and everything, and the neck fell off the old, the classic white Les Paul Jr. that he had. And he changed the pickup on it, and he said it never sounded the same without the Velvet Hammer. So that's a shame. But he's actually gone on to appreciate the stock pickups on the old Gibsons. He actually, when he went to, I think it was his first American tour, he went into a music store. And back in that era, in the 80s, Les Paul Juniors were not popular. And he ended up buying about 8 of them in the store for next to nothing, because, they were in the back. They weren't even in the front of the store. You had to go to the back to get a big box of these old classic 50s and 60s Gibson Les Paul Juniors. I upgraded a $99 guitar with 1959 Gibson P90 pickups. So I did use that on this. So I used that along with this mostly, the feedback and stuff, because I couldn't get much out of this. I used that because I could manipulate the neck more on that. But I also had to, because I couldn't play as good as him with the twists and the descending stuff, because you've got to bend up and back down and bend the neck, and the technique is tough. For some of the stuff, I did put I dive bombed on it with a Floyd Rose. This actually, for a pre-production, I had to do pre-production on this, because the song is so interesting and takes so many twists that I had to kind of mark it out, because even though I've listened to the song a million times, I couldn't remember all of the little nuances in the song. So Adam's guitars, I know Adam's guitars at the time, because he played the Telecaster, he played bass early on. A lot of the bass lines for Adam and the Ants was Adam's bass play. Actually, he wrote a lot of the bass parts. But early on, he used a U87 Neumann microphone on the guitars, on his Tele, and also he used a U47 on his vocals, a FET microphone. And Adam was obsessive about studying things. He'd study things like Elvis songs, where he'd even go into the syllables of the impact of a syllable in a line. Since my baby left me. Learning from the greats. I actually do that myself when I sing. I learn more of the inflection and the way that they use vibrato, like people like Bowie, things like that. So I see that, but I didn't think of the actual syllable aspect of it. So that's something I'm going to try and think about more in the future. And Adam, early days, from before he was famous, he struggled with mental illness. But I don't want to push that, because a lot of the Adam and the Ants documentaries always love to zoom in on that aspect. But I want to look at the positive of it. If you're having trouble mentally and you can't switch it off and everything is constantly swirling, Adam used that to push him. I think it was like a mania. So he used that mania to actually push himself musically. and push the band and keep going and keep going. And, you know, in the end, he burnt out. He was going to take, it's what he said, an 18-month break, and it turned into 18 years. I just wanted to make a positive out of it. A lot of the best musicians have a little bit of a screw loose. I've even noticed a lot of the best like pickup builders and amp builders and things like that, they tend to be pretty out there, man. But they use that obsessive quality to their personalities to push it into something good. Adam went up to Malcolm McLaren, who was getting success on the scene, and basically paid him $1,000 and said, would you manage me? Because Adam and the Ants back then, they were doing the bondage thing. Malcolm McLaren owned a bondage shop at the time. So a lot of the punks were, you know, into that scene, not so much into the scene, but into the look of the scene. Beat to My Guest, things like that, the early lyrics, they displayed that. But he suggested the Native American aspect of it, you know, and the Burundi beat as well. So there was the drums. Malcolm McLaren stole his band and became Bow Wow Wow. So Adam was like, what the fuck, he's on his own. So, but that was key, because it pushed Adam, and I'll show you type of thing, to McLaren. And then he ended up putting together one of the best bands in the 80s. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke. Don't drink, don't smoke, what do you do? Subtle innuendos follow. This is a side thing. What pissed me off about Adam doing his solo thing is the fucking trumpet. They replaced like kick-ass guitars with the goddamn trumpet constantly through everything. And I'm like, Jesus, I can't listen to this. So that was a huge turn off for me when it came to, you know, where Marco kind of went down. He was still working with Adam at the time, but the trumpet drove me nuts, dude. So yeah, a huge influence on me. I want to thank Marco, because I think, you know, he set me on the path to thinking, what's that sound? That Marco sound, that warble, the movement, the color, the hooks. He's currently playing with Shakespeare's sister. And when I told my wife that, she before I met her, she had Adam the Ants t-shirts, but she is really into Shakespeare's sister as well. So when I told her that, she was like having a nerdgasm. So, and he sent me some photos of the rig he was using. I think he was using a Helix. And he was like, my apologies, I don't know what I was thinking. So yeah, if you're interested in how I got my sound, I check out my Instagram, and there's pictures on my mic positions and the gear I use, all my settings, the actual settings that Marco used back in the day. This is brilliant. This is like Christmas for me. I love it. You know, I think you can tell I'm happy. I'm a happy Owen, and it's a good start to the year. Technically, I think going from, you know, black metal to this is a nice palate cleanser. What's coming next? We are back in Typo Negative land on the next video, and it's going to be World's Coming Down era. And then after that, maybe a little bit of Iron Maiden, who knows? So stay tuned. If you like these vids, please share this with any Adam the Ants groups you like, or goth adjacent groups, because I know all the goths love this shit. And yeah, any guitar forums, any guitar groups on Facebook, please share, because I'm crawling. I had a boost, not a huge boost, about 500 subs from the Iomi stuff that happened. And then after that, I think because I had so many downvotes, so many dislikes, I think I had one period where out of all of my videos, I got one comment in 24 hours. One comment on all my videos. So yeah, it giveth and it fucking taketh away. Look at this shit. Save Circle of Tone, share, subscribe. Alright chaps, have a good one. I'll see you next time. Circle of Tone.